wanted to come together and talk about emotional intelligence and just really talk about some tools that both men and women can use to navigate and create better relationships, right? And so that's KhayShep. You know, you've always been an inspiration, longtime mutual, and author, the author of Authentically Rich, the first steps to the authentic self. As we get into this conversation, can you tell us a little bit about your book?
This book, I mean, like, I marvel at your book. Your book is amazing. I'm like, your poetry, and you could tell how much you put of yourself into it, right? The same thing with Authentically Rich. I put a lot of myself into this book, and I talked about the hurts and the pains and how I was able to overcome. But the goal for my book was so that people could basically write their own book. Like, you could write your own story, because it's not only a book, it's a journal.
Oh, that's what's up.
So I ask questions, and I have a journal page where you can answer those questions. Yeah, I'll show you. So I have very short chapters because I want it to be insightful. I want it to be impactful. So you have an opportunity to journal inside of your book. And I talk about my relationship with my mother, the strained relationship that I had with her. All the way, I talk about, you know, me being raped at 20. I talk about a lot of things that happened in my life and how I was able to overcome them. But I also give the reader an opportunity to answer those questions regarding the chapter itself, right? So it's a very interactive, yes, it's very interactive. Very interactive. It's very insightful. It's some deep stuff. It's not an easy read. And it's a short book. I wanted it to be short, impactful, and insightful. So it's a short read. It's not a long read, but it might take you a long time to read it. You know, I've been told that. Like, I read 2 chapters and I had to put it down. I had to walk away. I had to walk away because I had to think about it. Like, I've been told that. Like, it's a good, they're like, it's a really good book, but it hits those triggers. And it makes you ask those questions of yourself. And if you're not ready, you're going to put the book down. Definitely.
Absolutely. I think shadow work. Shadow work can be tough.
Yes.
And if you're but it's necessary, and the benefits are incredible. So for those that are listening, make sure you go ahead, follow the link back to KhayShep's page, and you can cop her book from her website, right?
You can actually get it on, do I have it on TikTok Shop? I have to add it. You can get it right now. You can get it on Amazon. I have, Amazon has it too. Okay. But if you directly, just inbox me, and then we'll arrange something, because I can ship it to you. I have copies.
What do you think about, you know, emotional intelligence? What would be your personal definition of emotional intelligence?
You know, the word is thrown around so much, and I don't think people really know what it means. Yeah. You know, it's become like that word, like accountability, like accountability, you know, emotional intelligence. But I had to look it up because I know what I feel about the word, but I wanted to look up the meaning of the word, right? The 2 words, rather. So the first part that I found was self-awareness. So it's just being aware of your emotions, right? And then it's self-regulation, right? So basically self-soothing, understanding when you're feeling impulses, when you're being triggered, like being able to self-regulate and even self-soothe, right? Self-motivation. So it means delayed gratification. So you're not always going to get what you want. You're not going to get your need met ASAP. Sometimes you have to wait to get your need met or to get what you feel across, right? Empathy. That's a big one because a lot of people can't empathize. They don't empathize. And,
Right.
we see that with the arc of patriarchy. There's no empathy, right? Unless it's men. Men will empathize with other men. So it's like, I cheated on you. That's part of this. You're a woman. You're here to suffer. So if I cheat, hey, so if I cheat, why is there a problem? You're here for my suffering. You're here to suffer because that's what women are supposed to do. You're here to suffer. And if we look, I know a lot of this has to do with the Puritan culture of, well, it's women's fault that the world is the way it is. Going back to Adam and Eve.
Oh my God.
It's a woman's fault. And that's why childbirth was hard. And you're supposed to suffer because you're a woman. So, yeah. And then relationship management, right? So it's relationship management. Relationships are give and take. It's about compromise, It's about working together as a team and tackling the problem and not tackling each other. So when you have emotional intelligence, you understand that. You want to fix the problem and not necessarily fix the person.
Right.
Because just because you don't agree, you don't want to fix the person. Right. So that's what I got from EI. I'm just calling it EI because it was long to write. It was very long to write. Like emotional intelligence. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna call it EI.
No, you're right. It does. It gets thrown around a lot, and I think sometimes, even as a trigger, we're like, oh, men don't have emotional intelligence, and really, it could be all of those things, or it could be just one of those things. Maybe you just don't see yourself. You're not self-aware, so you don't see yourself for who you really are, right? And if you can't see yourself for who you are, then you're not going to be able to determine how you show up in certain situations. We talked about patriarchy. I think a lot of men react off of patriarchal programming, where you're not even dealing with that person, the individual, but you're dealing with a regurgitated talking point that they've ingested as, oh, this is what it means to be a man, right? So it's just that repeat record you put on, like, no, this is what a man is. A man provides and protects. Well, women need to be accountable. You know what I mean? It's this kind of broken record. And then you start to wonder, am I dealing with you right now, or am I dealing with your programming? You know what I mean? And do you really see how you show up in the real world opposed to your talking point? Because there's a lot of contradictions in patriarchy as well, where it's like, yeah, you say this is what a man is supposed to be, but in real time, you actually show up as this. Were you aware of that? You know what I mean? If the answer is no, then it may be the emotional intelligence may be that growth area for you. I think emotional intelligence is also where cognition kind of meets intuition. You know what I mean? There's different parts of your brain have cognition and deal with your emotions. If there's a disconnect between those two things, you may not get to cognition. It may just be an emotional reaction. And yet sometimes we'll say that men aren't necessarily emotional, you know what I mean? Or that women aren't logical. In reality, we're both human beings with both abilities. But sometimes we get disconnected, and it's not just a male thing. There's some women that lack emotional intelligence. So, how can you get in connection with you so that your emotions and your intellect are working together, right?
Right.
No, absolutely. Then the other thing that I read about EI or EQ or whatnot is it's one of those things that you can actually improve. Like when you talk about IQ. Your ability to learn really doesn't change, right? You could be 12, or you could be, 40, you know what I mean? Your IQ is pretty much a fixed thing, you know what I mean? Not necessarily what you know, the information that you have, but, how you're able to acquire new information and learn new skills. That's fixed. Your personality is fixed, right? Who you are as a person it develops pretty early, but your EQ is something you can develop and work on and change, and that can change how you're effective in your work, in your love life, you know what I mean, just in life in general. I wanted to ask you kind of in tandem with that, like how does a lack of emotional intelligence in men and women contribute to keeping systemic forms of oppression like racism and sexism in place?
Ooh, to me, it's people working against their own best interests.
Hmm.
Period. Because even in racism, you work against your own best interests. And it's interesting because I remember hearing that at one point they wanted to offer everyone universal health care.
Right.
Well, because people were so racist and they didn't want black people to have universal health care, now we're in this crap.
Mhm.
Right? So sometimes it's like you'll cut off your nose to spite your face, even though you know you're going to walk around without a nose. And I think the same thing applies with sexism, because the isms, they're intersectional, but it's just towards a different subset, right? So when you're dealing with sexism and you're dealing with men who have been conditioned to believe that they're supposed to be the head, they're conditioned to believe that they're the leaders just because of their genitals. It's a sense of entitlement that is coupled with delusion.
Right.
It's delusional because it doesn't, just because you are born of a certain gender does not make you more fit to lead. And when I would do lives and men would come up, women supposed to, man is supposed to lead. And I'm like, if you knew anything about leadership, you would know that leaders come to serve. If you don't go to serve, if you're not coming to serve, then you're there for the wrong reasons. You're not there to lead. You're there to take advantage and to manipulate. You're not there to, because in order to lead, you have to know what is needed. You can't just go into a situation, I'm going to lead. What do you mean?
Where?
It's ridiculous. And I think as being a parent, and especially being a single parent, right? I took the lead from my sons, because you have to serve them. When you have children, you have to serve in order to know how to lead them. And I think that's part of the reason why I have such a great relationship with my sons, is because as a leader, I had to go and serve and say, listen, I know I did my, I was talking to Nature about this earlier. With my sons, I had to go to them and say, you know what? I know there's some things that I didn't do correctly. And there were some things that hurt you, whether they were intentional or unintentional. And I'm so sorry for that. And I want to be a better version of myself, not just for me, but for you.
Right.
And we ended up having the most astounding conversation. And this was with my oldest son. And after we had that conversation, we've been rebuilding our relationship and we get along really great. I asked him, and this was so poignant. I asked him, I said, do you think men want to be loved or respected? He said, respected. And I said, oh, okay. I said, so when I came to you and I took accountability, excuse me, and I took accountability and, and I apologized. I said, did that make you love me more or did that make you respect me more? He said, I already loved you, but my love was more out of obligation before. He said, but when you apologized and you took accountability, he said, my respect for you grew and my protection for you became more natural.
Wow.
I was like, are you, wow.
That's incredible to hear from your son.
I was like, I can't, because now it's like, who's trying to talk to you? You want his ass kicked? Like, who trying to talk to you? We gonna kick his ass. And I'm like, no, no, no. You know, we good, we good. Naisha and I had this conversation earlier, and it was like, it's so profound when you can see the relationship dynamic change for the better, and then understand there's a level of respect that they have for you that they didn't have before.
Right. There was a song. It's an artist out of Columbus called Middle Child. Her name is Middle Child. She had this song, love. It's called Useless, but the hook is like, love without respect is useless, right? And she goes through all these different examples of how, you know, you can say you love somebody, but if you don't respect them, that love, however great it may be, is not something that they can actually feed off of, or it's not sustainable, right? And that was my anthem, like when I started deconstructing from Christianity, is that love without respect is useless. Like, you can say that you love me all day and how compassionate you are and how filled you are with the love of God, but if that doesn't materialize in this real world, all it is lip service, right? And you know, I think you're right. You know, as far as like men thriving off of respect, almost translating respect as love. But I think when it comes to this accountability word, you know what I mean? A lot of that accountability word is first and foremost directed inward, right? And I think sometimes we take the accountability and we want to see other people be accountable, but we're not necessarily you know, so anxious to be accountable ourselves when it comes to systemic you know, forms of oppression. You know what I mean? Because I think sometimes I was in a live the other day and they were like, well, why do I have to be accountable to another man? And why do other men have to be accountable to me? And it's not that. It's just recognizing that you as a man, you know, if we're talking about sexism and patriarchy, right? You as a man live in a culture that's based on male domination. And whether you like it or not, you contribute to that culture in one way or the other, right? Based on how you've been raised, based on how you've been socialized, or just functioning as a man has been defined in this world. And so you have to be cognizant of that, right? And that's where emotional intelligence comes in play, because if you're not socially aware of how this world, this society affects other people, you will be walking around thinking, what is male privilege? I don't understand what that is. What is white privilege? I've never been privileged, because you're only looking at what's right in front of your face and not dealing with how other people are navigating this world. One recurring critique of men from women that I hear is that men in general lack emotional intelligence. Why do you think that is? Like, why does it materialize specifically for men? And what do you think men can do to demonstrate emotional intelligence on a more consistent basis? I know I'll be hitting, I'm sorry, I'll be hitting with the part A, part B questions. My mind
Well,
just
these
keep
are
going.
good. These are excellent questions. I mean, I looked them over, and I was like, "Woo, these are some bangers." So these are great questions. Men would actually have to humanize us. They would have to see us as people, and not just as property, or you know, cattle, or their baby mama. You know, they would
Yeah,
actually have to humanize us, and to be able to walk in our shoes and say, hey, black women have been through a lot, and black women have stood up a lot, and we've been there through a lot, and for us to be minimized in a lot of ways is it's degrading, it's humiliating, and it's almost, and the thing is that it runs so parallel to what white people do to us, European people do to us. So it's like, for men not to get it, it's like you get it if it was coming to you, but you don't get it when you do it to someone else. So that's the big disconnect. It's like, how come you get it when it's being done to you, but you don't get it when you're doing it to someone else?
no, that's facts, and that goes back into empathy, right? I think it doesn't help that the way manhood has been defined traditionally, right, is that if not a lack of emotion, very subdued emotions, right, where you don't necessarily the only emotion that's acceptable for men to express publicly might be anger or frustration, you know what I mean, or lust, you know what I mean, if the, you know what I mean, that's but not, you know, you sad or you know what I mean, or happy. Like I can't remember like when we had the Black Boy Joy trend, and it was like people were getting, you know, castigated for just frolicking, just having fun and enjoying life. You know what I mean? That shouldn't have even been a trend. That should have been a lifestyle. But it's so foreign to us to see just men happy, smiling. You know what I mean? I remember like it wasn't it wasn't cool to smile in a picture. You know what I mean? You got a picture, the way Jonathan Majors always poses. Reminds me of how every black man posed like back in the day. It's like, no, I don't smile in pictures. What you talking about? You know what I mean? So, but being able to, if not, you know, and that I understand everyone has their lane of what they're comfortable with, but being able to be at least in contact with the full range of your emotions, even if you're a stoic. You know, being a stoic doesn't mean that you don't have emotions. It just means that you have a poker face. But you're still in touch with your emotions. There's still many different things going on inside of you that you're in touch with. You know what I mean? You may not show that to everyone, but you need to show it to someone. Like you shouldn't be like on the battlefield, and then when you come home with your wife and kids, you're still on the battlefield. And they can't, your girl can't get on your lap. You know what I mean? You don't know how to hold your daughter because you're so uptight. You know what I mean? That shouldn't be the case. Your leadership style in the army, you know, as a drill sergeant, shouldn't be the same as your leadership style when you're at home with the people that you love, that are looking to you for affection, right? So I think that really hinders our ability to demonstrate emotional intelligence because we're just disconnected to our emotions, socially disconnected from our emotions more than women are. Not that we can't be in contact with it. And then, you know, ways to develop that emotional intelligence, getting a therapy, you know what I mean, it might be one thing. You know, I know that can be as cliche as saying accountability for women is, oh, well, black men just need to go to therapy. But really though, like I think there's a stigma with us using like medical services in general, but definitely with therapy because it's like I'm not just opening up to I'll use my girl as my therapist, right? Why I gotta pay someone to listen to me if I got a girl? But that's a lot of emotional baggage to saddle your woman with, right?
Yeah.
Even if she's a therapist herself, you know what I mean? There might be things that you're not as comfortable sharing with her because it might be about her, right? So you need someone who is, you know, in all sense sworn to secrecy, that you can talk to in an open way, and that has the skills to help you unpack some of those things.
You know, it was funny because I saw somebody make fun of a creator on here when he said, as a man, why am I going to go to therapy? You know, who's the therapist going to go to? So then they did a whole skit behind like, well, I'm a therapist, but I guess I'm going to go see a therapist. Well, I'm a barber. I guess I'm going to go see a barber. Okay. I'm like, when people need help, they go and get help, you know? Right. You know, so if a therapist needs a therapist, they're gonna go to one. You know, if a barber needs another barber, they're gonna go to one. Like,
right.
Like, you know, you're going, you know, thank you.
I need surgery. I'm gonna operate on myself. No.
Right.
And even in the church, if you're a pastor, you should have a pastor. You know what I mean? If you don't, I don't know, something's going on. So yeah, but it's funny how we, in every other aspect of life, that's common sense. But when it comes to mental health and when it comes to emotional intelligence and just dealing with, you know, like mental trauma, psychological trauma, emotional trauma, that's just a foreign concept. It's a foreign idea. But you wouldn't like just drive your car, you know what I mean, and never put oil in it, never put antifreeze in it. You just gonna drive and drive and drive until the wheels fall off with no maintenance. But we treat our mind that way. You know what I mean?
Right.
I'll just push it down, and I'll just, you know, I just keep it moving is what we say. But that's not healthy. Right. And then what happens is in those unexpected moments when pressure is applied, that's when you explode emotionally because you haven't been ventilating properly. And so now they just kind of explode.
but those things are triggers.
Right.
And the interesting thing about triggers is that unless you do the deep dive to find out where the trigger came from, you're gonna always keep being triggered. If somebody brings up something similar, you know, you're gonna feel like they're tap dancing on those triggers. Like, yeah. I said boo. What you mean by boo? But why is boo the problem? And I actually did a video about it, because if in the grand scheme of things, the universe cannot differentiate between good or bad, right? So if the universe can't differentiate between good or bad, why do you think your ass can? Like, you can't either. The thing is that it's what's triggering you that you determine good or bad. And I had to figure that out for myself, because at one point it just seemed like everything was triggering me. You know, when I was a lot younger, but it just felt like it was like everything was a boing, boing, boing. And it was like everything was like, ow, ow, like, ow, like, why am I feeling all of this? And then it got to a point I was like, you're too inflamed. You need to figure out why so many things are just triggering you. And I was like, oh, wow, I have a lot of healing work I needed to do. Because once again, the universe doesn't differentiate between a good or bad. It is us. You know, we use our own measurement of what's good or what's bad, right? And that's and the great thing about that is what you determine as good or bad is good. That's good. And what I determine as good or bad is good, because, you know, we get to use our own processing systems and our own decision-making skills on what's good or bad.
Yeah. Right? That reminds me of like growth mindset versus fixed mindset. You know what I mean? Because when you talk about good or bad and someone says, well, I'm a good man, right? Oh. And then you say something about like, well, okay, all men are, you know, deal with sex and more, you know, whatever. It's all men until it's no men. Men is the it's all men until it's no men is the popular phrase. And they're like, well, wait a minute. I'm a good man, but not understanding that good is a relative statement in and of itself. And as a quote unquote good man, even if your goal is to be good, there's people in this world that don't perceive you that way based on their interaction with you, right? So you're trying to make something that's subjective as a fixed characteristic of yourself. And then also at the same time, not really focusing on being a better man, because you think good is like this place that you've arrived at and there's no more work for you to do, right?
Ooh. Oh, exactly. It's highly subjective. And what's interesting about, that's why I'm like, I believe there are people, I don't believe that people are good or bad. I don't put them in those boxes, because I think it's an unrealistic expectation. You'll always expect them to be that person. You know, if a person is good, you're going to always expect them to be in the box of good and never to make a mistake. They're always supposed to be, I'm good. Like, just always supposed to be good. And then a person who you deem bad, them in that box, and you expect them to always be bad. You expect them to always do things that are bad. And that's not always the case. It's like we are shades of gray. And what determines good or bad is based on the individual, right? It's based on the individual.
Right.
We can look at people doing bad things, right? People do bad things. But does that relegate them to be a bad person? Right? Because if that's the case, that means there's no room for growth. That means there's no room for improvement. You know, if you do one bad thing, then that means that's it. There's no coming back from that.
There's no rehabilitation.
Right. There's no, and even if you try, it doesn't matter. You're going to always have the scarlet letter A on your head. Like, it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter how hard you try. You're still going to be deemed as a bad person. I think that's ridiculous.
How does healing from trauma and practicing self-love relate to the topic of developing emotional intelligence? And how does your personal healing journey relate to this topic?
Ooh. Oh, that's a deep one. I was like, he got to say that again. Okay. Um, I've been through a lot of trauma in my life. And I could say the past 5 years has been the calmest my life has been. Right. And that's because I made a conscious choice to move. I moved out of New York and I moved to Pennsylvania. So I can have a more stable environment for my sons. And I did it, but the main reason was, I mean, my healing journey, I didn't think my healing journey would be this, and I'm grateful for it. Don't get me wrong. I'm so happy for it. But I did it primarily for my sons, because to raise two Black males in Brooklyn, New York, in a highly populated gang area, in a very heavily policed area. So when my youngest son was about 10, going on 11, I said, we out of here. And I was able to give him his childhood, because where we were, he wasn't going to be able to have one. He couldn't go to the park and play. You have to worry about, pow pows and all kinds of crazy stuff. But where we moved to, he could go outside and skateboard, bicycle, do all the stuff that kids are able to do. And that's what I needed for him. I needed that. I needed him to, have his childhood.
Right.
So my situation, I mean, one of my earliest memories of being 5 years old was having an uncle chase us downstairs at gunpoint. We was at my aunt's house, and he was intoxicated, and he made us run downstairs from the 5th floor with our hands in the air, no coats on, in the winter time, with a gun. He chased us with a pew pew. I can't tell you why. That man,
okay, that's fine.
He never apologized, never took ownership, just
no. Wow.
And I've witnessed a lot. And the sad part is that when you witness a lot of stuff, that kind of shapes your idea of what relationships look like, what love looks like. And you're not even realizing that you're not loving or valuing yourself in that, because you're going according to the patterns. So when you see at age 10, your uncle slap his girlfriend down to the ground, and when you witness your aunt get into a fight and almost cut her boyfriend's finger off, when you see these things as a child, and you even witness, your own parent have her issues in relationships, it shapes you and really, it fragments you. Yeah. And I was really fragmented. And up until the point where my mother remarried, she got involved with someone when I was 11, and she married him when I was 13. Unfortunately, he wasn't old enough to have a ready-made family. He was literally 10 years older than me and 11 years younger than my mother. He wasn't ready. And he was in the military. So he moved us from New York, and we lived in Japan for 3 years. And during that time, I didn't like him. I couldn't stand him. He tried to groom me, and he did SA me. And I ended up pulling a butcher knife on him. So it's been a lot of just witnessing trauma or being a part of trauma. And so there was a lot of stuff there that I wasn't even aware of. I didn't even know where to look or where to search or how to search. Being in mental health did help. And I will say that it did help. And I have gone to counseling for quite a few of the things that I experienced over the course of my life. But I also took due diligence to say, okay, I need to get to the bottom of this. Like, I need to understand why I have unrequited love. Why am I accepting less than what I deserve? And the conversations would be pretty interesting. Like with my mother, she would say, I don't understand. You know, you're such an attractive woman. You know, you're intelligent, you're funny, you could cook your ass off. You have all these great qualities, but you can't attract a good man. And you know what I would tell her? You can't expect an A project with an F manual.
Hmm. Serious.
Yeah. So if you gave me a manual with a table with 3 legs and it's supposed to have 4 and it's supposed to have like 8 screws and I got 6, like
Yeah.
what you expected me to do with that? I'm gonna put together the best thing that I can. I'm gonna do the best that I can. So I've worked on myself a lot, and a big part of my work was Authentically Rich, my book. That was a big part of the work. A necessary part of the work. And my mother she always says, you always keep pulling the layers back. You keep pulling. But I know in order to heal, I have to rip back those layers.
Yeah.
And in order to grow, I have to pull back those layers. Because even a snake has to shed its skin. So
Right.
you have to, when you outgrow that skin, it has to shed, And when you want to heal and you want to be a better version of yourself, you have to pull back that skin.
Absolutely. And I salute your growth. That's the work that you've done with those boys is excellent. So you did magic with those 3 legs. You did magic. That's beautiful. It's a testament to all the work that you put in.
Okay, so as a man, how does going against patriarchal power structures affect you on a daily basis?
That's a heavy hitter. So I think that there's a couple things happening at once, right? So on the one side, it's been it's been some of the best times of my life because it's been every moment, every day, I am walking this path as more of my authentic self than I've ever been, right?
Mm.
No less of a man, definitely walking in everything that I've been through, but at the same time, not trying to fit myself into a box. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to fit into the Christian box. I'm not trying to fit into like any box where it's just like, oh, you got to do this, and this. You know what I mean? But what I found is, I mean, some of those things I still do. You know what I mean? But it's not out of a conformity. It's out of a genuineness of this is who I am and this is who I want to be, and that's very freeing, right? And of course there is a contingent of people who don't agree with that. Where it's like, oh, like if I was gonna go off of just TikTok, well, just in general though, it's like, oh, you're a simp, oh, you're a pander, all this critiques. But the reality is that whoever you decide to be in this life, there are gonna be people who support you, and there are gonna be people who don't, and they're gonna criticize you. So you might as well be criticized for who you actually are versus this constructed box that someone else is giving you that you're trying to fit into. And now, the people that don't really know you are pleased with your image and how that reaffirms who they want you to be. But the people that actually love you are the ones you're actually hurting, right? So yeah, you go out into the world and you feel like, oh, I'm, this and that. But when you come home, your kids, aren't necessarily connected to you. Your wife isn't necessarily connected to you. You're not really connected with your mother. You know what I mean? These are all the people who loved you most. In many cases, to be honest with you, are women. You know what I mean? But how is it that you say that you love your mother or you love your daughter or you love your wife, but yet you're supporting this entire ideology that really does not treat them as fully human? You know what I mean? And is quite dangerous to them, right? And so I think I hear a lot of men once they become fathers and they take that role seriously and they start working with their daughters, they start to change that tune, or if not, they're giving totally different advice to their daughters than what they project out into the world. Their daughter becomes this island, or or their wife, becomes this island where, but every other woman is treated a totally different way. So yeah, I think you're going to get some criticism, but at the same time, I'd much rather be criticized by someone who doesn't know me and doesn't necessarily care whether I'm happy or unalive than the critiques of the people that are closest to me that I actually care about. So
That's powerful. Okay, so as a man, how do you hold yourself accountable when you see yourself moving in a similar vein of patriarchy?
there's that word again.
A word
um,
again.
no, absolutely. So I think it's important that you remember, and this is, if you're on the wrong side of any oppressive system, right? It's not something that you chose. It chose you, right? I didn't ask to be born a man in this society, much like a white person didn't ask to be born white, right? But being that I am a man, there's always,
Excuse me.
the ability to leverage that system to my advantage at any given point. It's right there. You know what I mean? It's to try and use misogyny or sexism to my advantage because we live in a capitalistic system, right? And so but a couple of things. One, keeping people around you that are going to be honest with you. You know what I mean? That are going to give you honest feedback. That are going to more or less G check you. You know what I mean? If you're going off the rails. I think also keeping a strong regiment yourself of self-reflection. So taking time to meditate, taking time to journal and think about the things that you said and the things that you've done throughout the day. Because no one's going to be perfect. In fact, I think if you ever go into like a Toastmasters meeting, they count your ums and your ahs. And when you start counting ums and ahs, you actually say more ums and ahs at first. So when you start this walk and you start trying to deconstruct patriarchy and to speak about women differently and to speak about men differently, at first it's gonna seem to come out more. So be patient with yourself, but keep track of it. You know what I mean? And if you make a mistake, take accountability for it and apologize where apologies are necessary. Restore where restoration is necessary, reconcile where reconciliation is necessary. But I think, keeping, being mindful and practicing mindfulness has been the best tool for me because I'm more in the moment in my own body. And so I can kind of gauge more what I'm feeling, first of all. Again, going back to emotional intelligence, gauging what I'm feeling and knowing what my triggers are to help mitigate that, right? So even if I do get triggered, how I respond to that trigger is different, where it's like, give me a few minutes. It's okay to step back. And the more you, I would say, deconstruct your toxic masculinity, where you don't think that just because you're a man, you have to say something. I spend time in silence. Like if I don't have anything to say, I will generally just not say anything and just be like, you know what? There's a great creator or I know a great person who can tell you, something about that and direct that spotlight elsewhere as opposed to always having to be the one to solve for something. One of the biggest helps for me in problem solving is knowing that I don't have to always have to have the solution, but I am responsible for keeping the conversation going on how to problem solve. So I don't have to always have it. I can point to something else, another resource, and that might be my role as opposed to having to be the hero, if that makes sense.
That's very profound. And I just want to add, like, from my experience, because it's easy, like, as an older woman, right?
Yeah.
Being that I'm 52 and I'll be 53 in 2 months. So it would be easy for me to jump on the bandwagon and be like, women shouldn't dress like that, because that's always the go-to. Like,
Right.
and I laughed at it. I did a few videos about it because I'm like, um, women my age need to stop because they know they were at Freaknik, but that's another story. Like, you was at Freaknik, so don't play. Like,
Right.
but what I realized is that in deconstructing that ideology was to understand that women that are appropriately dressed or fully dressed are assaulted more than
Right.
anyone who is, dressed provocatively, right? And in terms of, like, the protection conversation, men that we know harm us more than strangers.
Right.
So once I started to put, like, the facts behind it, it was like, dress however you want. I'm not going to shame another woman because it works against my own best interest. But then I also know the truth behind that, which is women are harmed with regular clothing. And if it was about clothing, babies and elderly people wouldn't be harmed.
Right.
So we know that's not that's not it. You're just dealing with people that have a perverse way of dominating people and just wanting to harm them because they can. In a society where it's almost congratulated, like, oh, you coerced her out of some, you the man,
Right.
oh, you took it, oh, you the man. and this, what we have to do is start teaching our sons to humanize women. And the only way they'll be able to have empathy is once they're able to humanize us. Without seeing us as human, you're going to continue to get the all the nonsense that's out there.
No, absolutely. I think choosing the right partner is also very important. Like my wife holds me accountable all the time. We have conversations. I think sometimes men will choose women that they just want to echo them, you know what I mean? And they're looking for blind fellowship.
Mhm.
But if you have a partner, someone who's just as smart, if not smarter than you, just as talented, if not more talented than you, then they can actually shore you up where you might be missing something, right? And I think that's where we go wrong. Like it's not about just a role, you know what I mean? Like if you're looking for a woman to just cook and clean, like what's the difference between having a wife and having like just a maid service and you know what I mean and going to McDonald's, you know what I'm saying? You need someone who's going to compliment you, you know what I mean? And then like my relationship with my daughters, like we should be informing our children so that when they get older, they can also give you accountability and not stray away from that. Just because someone is younger doesn't mean they don't have something to say, right? If my 20-year-old has mastered a skill that I don't know and I need to know it, I'm gonna humble myself and ask her, hey, can you show me how to do this? But I think sometimes we get so stuck in what the role should be. I should be the leader. That means I should know more. That we discount anything else anyone else has to offer, and we rob ourselves of a genuine relationship.
Mhm. And I know there's been a lot of comments. I just want to touch base on, I'm not talking about, you can't teach a grown man because he's already set in his ways. But I was basically referring to young, like, boys and young men who are still open to learn, who are still open to be able to humanize us and see us, right? What lessons have you learned about your gender when it comes to patriarchy and the damage it causes?
So I don't think I was in the live the other day and we were talking about privilege, right? And there was a man that came up, and he was just like, I don't know what male privilege is. I've never experienced it. And I think it more and more, the more I talk with men, at least a lot, is that we don't necessarily recognize what male privilege is. Even if you're black or a member of another, marginalized group, there's certain things that we as men just don't have to think about and don't have to go through that women go through. And that is an advantage. It's not that life is better, or there's something that, there's some golden ticket that we get. There's so many things that we don't have to deal with. So I think a lot of times, in navigating patriarchy, you always have to first of all define it, because I think it's similar to accountability, similar to emotional intelligence. It's a word that we throw around that we really haven't taken the time to define. So when I say a male dominated society, it hits different than me saying patriarchy. But it is a male dominated society that women historically, for the history of this country, for the most part, could not participate in, right? Black women didn't even have the right to vote, right, until like 1965, right? So when we're talking about quote unquote feminist thought and how that destroyed the black community, I don't see how we get there at all, because there's so many other factors that contributed to where we are today that had nothing to do with feminism, right? And growing up, no one was talking about feminism. Like, not until like the 2000s was it like something that was in popular conversation. If you were a feminist, you were like in academia, you know what I mean? Or, kind of on the fringe, you might get to see an Oprah show or something like that. But it wasn't like it was a popular movement. When I think about the crack epidemic, I think about, the deindustrialization of our neighborhoods. I think about the, criminal justice system. All of those things, have more prominence. So when women are finally saying, hey, this affects us too, right? Instead of demonizing that, we as men really should just take the time to listen to what women are saying to us, right? And then try to apply that, right? As opposed to saying, trying to demonize. But I think a lot of us are so religious and so indoctrinated into patriarchy and white supremacy that we can't see our face to spite our nose. And that's so you spend a lot of time trying to just deal with the basics, right? Just trying to understand that this thing exists, that there is a such thing as gender oppression. And then once you once you can get someone to see their role in it, then I think it's a lot easier to navigate that discussion.
I agree. I definitely agree. It's interesting because being on TikTok, I feel like I now have my PhD in psychology. When you engage with so many people and you get so much either pushback or it's like, okay, thank you. And like my video, I just did a video yesterday, and it's called Women Are Hell. That video, I'm telling you that women are hell. And what I got from that is men have been trying to convince women that they're heaven. Like, come join, you want to be a part of our heaven. But we know that heaven is basically the hell. It's root chakra, it's lower vibrational, it's like, come heaven. You remember and it just came, Vampire in Brooklyn, when Eddie Murphy was, right? Yeah. So he has her, and she's seeing this beautiful mansion and all this stuff. And then when she finally sees it, it's like some abandoned house that's tore up and falling apart. And it's like, and that's what it reminds me of. It's like, you're trying to convince me that you're offering me this beautiful palace if I come and I submit to you. Right. And and your idea of a traditional woman, which means 50-50. And it's like you're trying to, it's a bait and switch. It's an absolute bait and switch.
Absolutely. It's like there's all these caveats to it. You know, I'm only going to provide and protect for my woman, the woman that I claim, right? And I'm only going to provide and protect if she's submissive to me. And I'm only going to provide
Right.
and protect. And it's this whole laundry list until when it really comes down to it, is like, when are you providing and protecting? Because I think that, and this is important, I think, for everybody to know, like, when you're talking about intervening in a situation, like, the you getting violent with that other person is the last resort. When you're talking about de-escalating something, that's not de-escalation. A lot of people think
Right.
de-escalating is getting involved and escalating it further, right? But there's,
Right.
there's techniques you should be able to use in just having a conversation with someone, you know what I mean, that can help
Right.
de-escalate a situation to give that other person the chance to get away. But we're so convinced that getting involved means getting violent that we avoid talking to each other altogether, right? Oh, I don't want to get involved because, I'm not trying to risk my life. No one was asking you to risk your life. You know what I mean?
Right.
But
Right.
then when it comes down to, if you're going to make that assumption that having a conversation with another black man about his behavior is going to automatically turn to violence, can you really blame police officers for pew-pewing first and asking questions last because they want to
Questions.
go home at night, right? So we're
Mm.
reinforcing the same stereotypes that other people outside of our community are using to do us harm, right? And so we should be able to, as members of the same community, talk to one another at the very least, right?
It's interesting, the providing and protecting aspect, like you said, and Karen makes a good point as well. It's always with conditions. So it's like, I'll protect you as long as you are dressed to my standards. I'll
Right.
protect you if you're not out past a certain time at night. I'll protect you as long as you're not walking down a certain street at a certain time at night. I'll protect you if conditions. I'll protect you if. And if I don't comply with any of those things or any of those conditions, then you won't protect me. Because that's basically what you're saying.
Right. So is it really protection or is it control?
It's control.
Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Whoever wins is the one that writes the history. How did they do it will forever be a mystery. Winning is the mindset you keep when you won't accept defeat. And I repeat, I'm the creator of my sheet. I got some images in my head I don't bother to touch. Anxious cause you don't know who is who and what is what. Setting fires to bridges, yeah, I'm keeping all doors shut. Find solace in being separate cause it's therapeutic. So when you're claiming that you victim, make sure you're the plaintiff. You gon' hear me when I tell you I ain't nothing to play with. I sing it to you in a soft tone, but I got grit. Heard some niggas been talking and listen to what they said, and I'm just mad that she ain't give it to me. And that girl Yon was great when I liked her, but now she ain't with a thing. He said he ain't a fan of marriage, but he passing out rings. Fraudulent, making money, selling off bad dreams. I'm locked up in my head thinking I'm toxic. If you talking down bad, then you may as well just gon' switch up your topic. I ain't got no love for you, gon' stop it. You a thespian and putting up in that, gon' drop it.